In the history of science fiction, there's likely never been a franchise that has undergone a more radical metamorphosis than Alien. From the initial horror stage to its action-packed evolution, Alien had built a universe ripe for exploration. However, after a disappointing follow-up, it seemed as though the series had transitioned straight into its midlife crisis, as failure after abysmal failure stacked up, completely unable to capture the magic of the first two. Try as they might, the franchise continued its downward spiral of increasingly convoluted storytelling into irrelevance as each subsequent edition actively harmed the brand. It seemed that the series had hit a very pathetic closure. But after a 5-year hiatus, a new project was announced which promised to bring Alien back to its larval stage. But does Romulus fulfill that bold prediction, or does it just continue the unfortunate trend of tarnishing the legacy of a once great IP?
But before we begin, I want to introduce you to a new feature. It's been brought to my attention that some people don't really like spoilers, but that's kind of my thing on this channel. So rather than berate you with spoiler warnings every 2 minutes, say hello to the Dark Hour Spoilometer. If it hits red, it's all been said.
The story picks up at some point between Alien and Aliens, with a salvage crew finding a xenomorph amongst the rubble of the Nostromo. Already leaning on the nostalgia, I see.
Also kind of impressive considering...
We then cut to our protagonist, Rain, a mining colony worker attempting to transfer off-world to a planet with some actual sun. She is blocked by a bitchy clerical worker who straight up lies to her about her required work hours, manually changing them to reflect a new fictitious value.
Unfortunately, quotas have been raised to 24,000 hours.
Her only company is her surrogate brother, the malfunctioning android, Andy.
That's it? That's the best you got?
Yeah.
Oh, that sucks.
Fate gives her a way out though, when her childhood friend and crush Tyler contacts her with a plan to get off this shithole they live on. He has discovered an abandoned dual outpost called Romulus Remus floating in orbit, which just so happens to have the supplies they need to leave. Also, it's suspiciously unguarded.
Coincidence? I think not!
Together they go on an ill-advised mission to recover what's needed, along with his pregnant sister Kay, android-hating cousin Bjorn, and pilot Navarro, who totally is not a lesbian, using Bjorn as a beard. After arriving at Outpost Romulus, Bjorn, Tyler, and Andy begin to explore the station and find the stasis pods they were searching for do not have enough juice. Instead of realizing this is a futile effort, they venture further in to find compatible fuel, and inadvertently awaken a shit ton of facehuggers being stored on the station. The guys become trapped in the lab with the overly zealous snuggle machines as Navarro and Rain run to their rescue. Andy gets a much-needed modification courtesy of Rook, a destroyed android who just so happens to look and act exactly like Ash from the first film. This modification repairs his glitches, upgrades his security clearance, and most importantly for the team, transforms him into a complete sociopath. With Andy's newfound door unlocking capabilities, they escape, but a single facehugger slips through the door and Navarro is implanted. Seeking answers, they plug in Rook, who gives them details on everything that we, the audience, already know about the xenomorphs, and advises them to kill Navarro.
Make it look like an accident. Yeah, maybe the stairs.
Instead, they decide to freeze the facehugger enough to make it retract from her, allowing them to remove it. This surprisingly works. Credit where credit is due. This script does at times have intelligent new ideas that were refreshing to see, and it's a shame that there wasn't more of this kind of writing throughout the entire movie. Bjorn and Navarro flee back to the ship, awakening a sleeping Kay in the process and attempt to escape. But the ticking time bomb bursts in Navarro's chest. In her death throes, she accidentally crashes the ship into the station. Kay and Bjorn emerge injured and attempt to navigate the Remus outpost. And after Bjorn has some fun with a xenomorph wall vagina, no, seriously, that's a thing, they're soon met by our old friends who kill Bjorn and capture Kay. Meanwhile, back in Romulus, Andy is given a new directive to acquire the Prometheus strain and get it off the station for further testing. Wait a minute, are you really gonna reference the movie in the series that everybody hates? Seriously? I, for the life of me, can't understand why they would do this. It's pretty much the consensus that Prometheus is the worst film in the franchise, and distancing it from this should have been priority 1. But I guess common sense will never reign supreme in Hollywood. According to Rook, who is 100% to be trusted by the way, this compound was developed in order to aid humans in space colonization and is stable. Despite the fact that we're shown on screen that it is not. And Rook is plugged into the very same computer with that information. Andy, Rain, and Tyler prepare to escape by equipping themselves with self-aiming pulse rifles. Props for giving an explanation on why these random miners are expert marksmen. No, seriously, pretty good. They are then told to not actually fire them. Why, you ask? Well, Andy uses big brain to say, acid blood, which is meant to imply that it will burn through the floor and kill them all. They locate the hive and find Kay near death but miraculously unimplanted for vague reasons. Debating if they should use the Prometheus strain to save her, they decide against it. But don't worry, she opts to do it herself later. They flee a shit ton of Xenos that appear out of absolutely nowhere. Ray gets Kay onto the lift of the ship and gives her the compound, tells her to take off and get into the stasis tube to save her life. She then goes back for Andy, who has been somehow injured, apparently by a plot-induced seizure. Kay, instead of following directions, goes back to the ship and injects herself with the compound so she can stay alive and keep the ship ready for Andy and Rain. They are the main characters after all, so she is aware that they will make it. Andy and Rain meanwhile decide, fuck the danger of the blood, we're gonna shoot them all anyway. But just to be safe, let's turn off the gravity. Rain's logic is that if the acid can't fall, it won't burn through the floor and the hull. This doesn't account for the small fact that the walls melting would also cause explosive decompression.
It's an easy fix, one line of dialogue.
Really though, the scene is there so we have this really cool shot of everyone dodging swirling acid. Also, when they turn the gravity back on, that shit is just gonna fall anyway. This marks the point of the film where effects completely become the priority over plot. I'm not going to cover the rest of the forced nonsense that they cram in from this point on, but I do need to mention that shortly after this complete lack of rationale in physics, we are treated to what might possibly be the single worst callback of all time.
Get away from her, you bitch!
Delivered so terribly, it caused me to roll my eyes hard enough to see my brain.
Rain and Andy of course get back to the ship and take off just as the outpost is destroyed by the rings of the planet, again for unknown reasons. They find Kay and Rain tries to help her into stasis, but instead Kay gives birth to an alien egg which hatches.
Happy birthday!
Into a beautiful bouncing baby hybrid who eviscerates Andy and Kay. It attempts to kill Rain, but seeing as how this is an alien film, you know how it goes. She survives and does an unnecessary epilogue because that's always what they do anyway. Well, of all the films I've seen this year, this was certainly one of them. The all too familiar sequel that attempts to do the exact same things the previous ones did before it, in hopes that the audience has short enough memories that they can't remember all this shit happened already. It barely attempts to deviate from the formula, and ends up being very paint by numbers as a result. One thing I didn't include in the plot, but I think is worth mentioning, is the extremely random android prejudice storyline that they begin and then quietly abandon as it doesn't fit with this story at all. One of the staples of the good Alien films was grounded realistic characters who felt like everyday people you might encounter. Whether it be the space truckers or the Marines, these felt like real human beings you'd want to go have a beer with. Or in my case, tequila. Giving you the connection that allowed you to take the journey with them. This is the key to great storytelling, and in the case of the Alien films, it's the reason you root for them to make it out alive.
I say we grease this rat fuck son of a bitch right now.
Well, most of them at least. However, this is one of the primary issues with Romulus. Despite spending a ton of time with these people in the beginning of the film, we don't ever really feel all that attached to them. They start out feeling like individuals we could have become fond of, but like so many other things in this movie, the follow-up just fails. Instead of fleshed out characters, they end up being two-dimensional concepts we are supposed to empathize with. The film stars Kaylee Spaney as Rain, a nondescript low-level employee of Weyland-Yutani. Rain dreams of escaping the hell of the mine colony grind. She represents the caring one of the crew, as she's clearly the one who never wants anyone to be left behind. Unfortunately, Spaney does a terrible job of showing this, as she spends a significant chunk of the film struggling to convey anything but plank-like behavior. It's not as egregious as Captain Marvel or literally any Kristen Stewart role, but it does make it hard for us to warm up to her. I will give credit where credit is due. They didn't portray her as an insufferable girl boss, which is a nice change of pace. Opposite Rain is Andy, played by David Johnson. He's our morality clause. They're simply to give you a sense that there's a degree of depth to this script.
I'm complex, and that's a lot for some people.
Of the characters in the film, he feels the most like a real person, which is especially hilarious when you consider he isn't one. Johnson does a great job of playing an android who's having his programming overwritten and directives changed, which is actually a fairly clever way to deal with a character's heel turn. Even going so far as to change his body language throughout the film to represent the two distinct versions of the character. If I had to choose an MVP of the cast, this is the clear-cut favorite. As for the rest of the cast, well, they certainly were there. We have our token asshole, the token tough chick, and a walking trope in the form of a single pregnant girl.
Who's the father? Some asshole.
They even managed to throw in a studio-mandated callback in the form of Rook, who, let's face it, is just Ash. A character who somehow has an exceptional amount of screen time and presence despite being dead.
You're supposed to be dead!
Am I not?
I suppose we do need to touch on the love interest for a minute. Tyler, played by Archie Renault, a character we know is the romantic pairing because the script flat out tells us. At no point does he show even a modicum of chemistry with Spaney, though he does show it for his sister, which begs the question why he's so inconsistent. Looking at you, Alvarez. However, this creates a situation where the most important thing he does is die, and even that's not all that important.
I thought you were dead. Oh, I thought you were dead too.
Romulus may have the strangest pacing I've ever seen in my entire movie-going life. Not only does the beginning drag on for seemingly forever, it also has a serious case of false finish syndrome, giving it an incredibly unique problem of both taking too long to start and conclude. This basically gives us a narrative without a second act, as what we can call the middle is exceptionally short by comparison, leading me to believe that there was a significant amount of plot development which was left on the cutting room floor. Considering this series has a history of director's cuts that improve the films, I wouldn't be shocked to see a version which corrected this problem. But let's not hold our collective breath.
Oh no.
One of the biggest issues over the years within the Alien franchise has been the transition from practical effects to a reliance on CGI. It took the gritty realism and grunginess of the early films and made it look far too clean and manufactured. This was one problem that Fede Alvarez seemed extremely keen on correcting. Obviously, when you want to use the likeness of an actor like Ian Holmes circa 1979, you're gonna have to do it digitally. But for the most part, the creature and set designs used are practical, which harkens back to the golden age, giving it that genuine look. The incorporation of silicone rubber for the xenomorphs' nests and facehuggers gave it a feeling of realism CGI simply can't match. Unfortunately, this was a promise kept for approximately 75% of the film. The latter portions completely abandon this in favor of modern shortcuts that just look terrible when seen in such close proximity to one another. The movement towards basing the plot around the effects rather than the effects supporting the plot ruined the experience. It felt as though they were dead set on hammering square pegs into round holes with the express purpose of getting every single idea they had into the narrative simply because someone said, "Hey, do you know what would be really cool?" Which is a shame, because up until that point I could genuinely say I was enjoying the authenticity. Whereas the visual effects for the most part were solid, one aspect I could truly say needed work was the sound mixing. This is not a problem exclusive to this film, and I'm not exactly sure what's happening in Hollywood, but someone really needs to tell these studios that we as the audience would love to hear what the characters are saying. I had high hopes for this film, and unfortunately, it falls short. Is it the worst in the franchise? Absolutely not, but it does land somewhere between Alien 3 and Resurrection, which leaves much to be desired. From a number of plot conveniences such as stasis chambers that stop stasising to requiring a metric fuckton of headcanon just to make full sense of the plot, there was so many things which could have been done better. Not to mention the fact that they seemed hell-bent on not only reminding us of every single other film from the series, but emulating all of them so much that it gets lost in itself. This is a safe movie, a tired retread of the past, not trying to do anything new. The Alien equivalent of The Force Awakens, relying on nostalgia and key jangling, but not really understanding what made the original so great. This would have likely been better served remaining as minimally related to the other films as possible and being its own thing. But as it stands, it's just a reminder of all the good and bad that came before it. And if that's not enough to convince you that this lackluster extraterrestrial escapade isn't going to be saving the Alien franchise, I'm not sure anything I could possibly say would do the trick.